Hey guys, Taz here from Aquatics. Today we're going to be discussing UV sterilizers, with a particular emphasis on the Pentair UV Sterilizers, or the Pentair range of UV sterilizers. This is an item we stock at Aquatics and an item we use ourselves. I personally am a big fan of the Pentair UV Sterilizers, run them on my own systems, freshwater and marine, and I think they're awesome. They're they're a great unit, and that's one of the reasons why we chose to stock them here. I think before we start talking about UV sterilizers and why you should consider it Pentair 1 or Lifeguard 1 or which UV sterilizer you should choose, I think quite an important thing to note is the difference between a UV clarifier and a UV sterilizer. Now, a UV sterilizer and a clarifier often are mistaken as the same things. And I mean, in a sense, you are correct, right? Because a UV clarifier and a UV sterilizer do contain the same parts, right? They're all technically the same in the sense that they're made up of the same conjunction of parts, right? They're all a UV light, all have the body, they're the way in which they're manufactured are more or less the same. I think the biggest difference between a UV sterilizer and a clarifier is generally the intensity of the wattage and the flow rates you run through them. So a UV sterilizer it requires a lower flow rate with a much higher wattage than a clarifier. A clarifier is essentially the latter. A clarifier is generally not as high wattage as a UV sterilizer, and the flow rates are higher on them, and generally they're not as large because the water running through them does not need to have as long a contact time with them. If the sole reason you're looking at a Pentair UV sterilizer or a UV sterilizer in general is to maintain or control algae, I'd recommend going or opting for a much cheaper option, such as the Evolution Aqua UVs, which are a UV clarifier of an order of magnitude cheaper than the UV sterilizers. Many other UV clarifiers out on the market, ones I personally use myself and often recommend are the Evolution Aqua UVs, and these are the ones that we stock here at Aquatics. There are some other really good ones on the market, notable ones. Aqua L make one. There is of course the good old Aqua One if you're looking for a real budget option. And there's a huge range of pond UVs and UV clarifiers. There's an endless range of options on the market. And if you're looking to control algae, there is so many options for you, and definitely you'll find one for you, and you might be surprised and actually somewhat satisfied as you realize that your budget can now stretch a lot further because you're looking for a UV sterilizer to control a problem that can be maintained with an item that costs a significant order of magnitude less. So don't make that mistake. Whilst often in the hobby, we say bigger is better, or it's always better to have more. In some instances, if you don't need it, you don't have to buy it. So go a clarifier if you're only looking to control algae. There's many clarifiers that will control algae quite effectively. Now, if you're looking to control parasites and bacteria such as ick, protozoa, costia, as well as algae with a sterilizer, then a sterilizer is the way to go. A sterilizer of higher intensity will damage the cell walls or the particles that make up ick. Now, I think a really important thing to remember when sterilizing or trying to control parasites with a UV sterilizer is that you're not killing them. You don't remove ick or protozoa or costia. You don't remove it with a UV sterilizer. You sterilize it. What you do is by running the parasites through the sterilizer enough, you essentially damage them to the point where they can no longer reproduce. Through doing this, you limit their ability to actually have an effect on your fish. Ick protozoa lives within your tank. Just like any organisms, they reproduce, and they reproduce at the expense of a host. Now, host being your fish. So when you limit their ability to reproduce, they never get to the point where they can actually affect your fish. Pentair UV sterilizers, or UV sterilizers in general, can be used as an effective measure to prevent and control ick outbreaks. If you've got an ick outbreak in your tank, running a UV sterilizer, even on a temporary basis, can be enough just control the ick just enough so it can no longer reproduce and doesn't have that same intensity and strength that it did when attacking the fish. Much like controlling a common cold. You know, you might have some throat lozenges and some strepsils, and essentially what that does is neutralizes the bacteria to an extent where it can't reproduce at the same rate, and can't, therefore gives your immune system some time to cope with that bacteria. Exact same thing is happening within your aquarium. Running a UV sterilizer is essentially giving the immune system of your fish some time to cope with the sudden influx of ick or other parasites. Generally, this will give if you get it on time, it'll give the fish enough time to recover from a potentially fatal outbreak of parasites. Now, I think another important thing to remember with these units is that there are specific dose rates or flow rates in which you should run through your UV sterilizer to neutralize certain issues. So algae and parasites, for example, will have a different strength, dosing strength. Now, you can't really do both at the same time. You can control algae, right? But you would then restrict your ability to control parasites. And the latter is the same. By controlling parasites, you do restrict your ability to kill algae or control algae. If you want to do both, there are some ways to do it, but in all honesty, I'd recommend either running them intermittently or maybe potentially running dual UV sterilizers. Some ways to do it, and some ways I've heard of people doing, is essentially oversizing their unit and just running that at sort of a neutral flow rate which they work out themselves. So by putting through a larger unit, right, algae's getting going through fast enough, but there's still the contact time required for protozoa when running through the unit. So sometimes that sort of equals out. Now, it's not something I'd recommend, and to be honest, myself in my own experience, if I'm looking to control either, I'll either run for either. I'll either run to control algae or I'll run to control parasites. Generally, if you're controlling parasites, it will have some effect on algae because there is still that contact time. But yeah, generally, to be honest, if you're going to choose one and stick with that, roll with that. One question I get with the UV sterilizers is, will it harm my good bacteria? Will it harm my aerobic and anaerobic bacteria that I've worked so long, so hard to maintain and build up within my aquarium to essentially maintain this life cycle? And that's a really good question. I mean, it's a question that should be asked, and it's something that you should definitely be looking out for. Now, the short answer is no. Long answer is maybe sometimes in the case. See, the thing is, anaerobic and aerobic bacteria, or generally beneficial bacteria, lives within your substrate, your rocks, your driftwater in a freshwater aquarium, within your rockscape and in your sands, and even in your media, right? So, your marine pure blocks or your media blocks and vacuum rods. That's where your media lives, right? So it's not actually a free-floating bacteria in a sense like protozoa is, because it houses itself. So because of that, you don't get a lot of beneficial bacteria flowing through your tank, and therefore the chances of beneficial bacteria actually running through the UV sterilizer and dying off is quite unlikely. Now, are there cases of when you may lose a little bit of beneficial bacteria because it runs through your tank, or there's some kind of washed around with some wave makers, or pumped through your aquarium? Absolutely, yes, there is a chance of that. But the degree to which that happens is not enough to affect your aquarium. Beneficial bacteria dies off, intermittently throughout the life cycle of your aquarium, and there's many ways in which some of it dies, but overall, as long as it's growing at a faster pace than it's dying, you shouldn't have any issues. And running the UV sterilizer would be very unlikely to affect that. Now, last but not least, why in particular should you consider purchasing a Pentair UV sterilizer over some of the many great options out there? And I was facing that question too when first looking at UV sterilizers. And I think that probably the main reason that I ended up, I'm giving you a personal sort of experience and recommendation here. So this is from my personal experience running UV sterilizers and why we chose to stock the Pentair over some of the alternative units. The main reason for that is the size. Now, the main selling point, or probably the best thing I like about the Pentair UV sterilizers, is also their biggest downfall. Because having a unit that's 80 watt like this is 106 centimeters in length, and a really solid size, 100 millimeter units, they're very hard to place in your aquarium. But some of the benefits to this is the fact that they do have a larger contact time. Being such a large unit, the water flows through and comes in contact with the UV light and in as many ways possible. This maximizes the exposure bacteria and algae will have with the units, therefore making the rate in which it's neutralized or sterilized significantly expedite. It makes a pretty large difference, and therefore you don't need to run as high a wattage to sterilize the same amount of water volume. Now, that's a major benefit for me, and I run these on fairly large tanks, and it's not too much of an issue. But for people that are running on a smaller tank, maybe like a Red Sea or a sort of a smaller cage setup, and or you've got a really packed full sump with gear and equipment and skimmers, they're quite difficult to store. Now, Pentair has realised this. I believe they have, and they do have the EOS 50, which is the 50 watt essentially high strength unit. Now, it's quite an expensive unit, but it is very high powered, like the rating to which it can sterilize a pretty large volume of water, and it's a compact unit, so it's about the same diameter of the 80 watts, but it's significantly shorter. It's about 75 centimeters rather than the 106 centimeters, and it can neutralize a similar water volume. So that is an option when considering when considering a UV sterilizer for your aquarium, but it can be a downfall. So one of the reasons I particularly like them and recommend them is their size. But one of the reasons for certain people I won't recommend them is their size. I think some other great alternatives, if you're looking for a little bit more of a compact unit, is something like the Lifeguard Aquatics UV Sterilizers, which are pretty similar in quality, and they are an agriculture grade unit, and they're of a compact enough size where you can fit them into most aquariums. Pentair UV Sterilizers maintain a pretty high warranty. We put 3 years on them ourselves, and generally replacement is not much of an issue. You can literally call us up and we'll send you a brand new one out if you're having like a significant issue. But generally the only issue you would need replacing is globes and things like that, which of course like all pretty much any electronic, right? There are parts that wear down quicker than others, and globes do, and it doesn't really matter the application. Globes in general wear out. So that's really the main reason I quite like the Pentair UV Sterilizers. Hope you take this into consideration, and this is not absolute. This is a little bit out of my personal experience and some fellow hobbyists' personal experience as to what they like and what they use themselves and what we find beneficial. But it's not an absolute unit. Like, it's not definitive. This is the unit you have to have. I think it's a great unit worth considering. If it's within the budget of for a UV sterilizer of what you're looking at, I think it's definitely a unit worth taking some consideration to. If you've got any further questions on the unit that we haven't discussed in this video, feel free to give us a call. We'll do a separate video on plumbing, but before we go, I will put a little outline as to some of the plumbing parts it will come with. We include two essentially risers or barb fittings. This is essentially just a BSB 25mm to a 25mm vinyl tubing connection. If you want to hard plumb it, it's real simple. You just use this socket here, and you can purchase them from Bunnings, or you can purchase them from us. Just purchase a faucet socket, and that just screw straight in. Put a little bit of Teflon tape on there, and you shouldn't have too much of an issue. And then essentially you've got a female slip fitting, and you can hard plumb from there without much difficulty. Hose I always recommend and prefer working with when you're wiring an aquarium, because it's like, you can just sort of mix and match. It's pretty simple. Yeah, that's and of course you're going to get included simple bulkheads. You have a little flange. I'll go straight together like this, and I just screw on either side like so. Really simple. Screw on like so, and then you just screw straight in without much difficulty, just like so. And yeah, once they're screwed in, hose can go on top, and yeah, your bomb's away. It's very simple where the inlet is and the outlet is. Runs through essentially the same way you'd run a check valve or a even I'm just trying to think of some one-directional valves, maybe a ball valve, as an example. Just one inlet, one outlet, and water just passes through it. So it's, as far as plumbing, they're a very simple unit, and yeah, there's not too much difficulty to be considered when running one. Anyway, this has been Taz. Feel free to let us know if you have any questions or issues, or you'd like to see a further video on this, emphasizing some of the things we didn't quite touch on, or should have touched on, or did touch on, and just a simple emphasis on that. Let us know in the comments below, and yeah, we'd love to do some more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.